Hello, beautiful people. This is yours truly, Christine, with Exhibit Africa Inc. It's been a while, it's been a minute since we did our series on interesting and fun facts about different countries on the African continent. And today I'm delighted as usual to be back to share some fun and interesting facts about another beautiful country. And this country is really special to me, and I'm gonna let you know why. But for those who are joining us for the first time, I wanna welcome you. Thank you for joining us, and I wanna encourage you, if you haven't checked out our previous posts. So we left off at letter T. So we started off in alphabetical order from letter A, and the mission is we're going all the way to letter Z, covering the fun and interesting facts of different African countries. So we cover art, culture, lifestyle, a little bit of politics. So if you're interested in knowing, in getting a better understanding, on getting some insight on one of your favorite countries on the continent of Africa, I would strongly encourage you to check out our series. Now, so the country we're going to share today is a very special country to me, and that's Uganda. I'm from Uganda. Thank you very much. I proudly say I'm Ugandan. Now, a few years ago, it wasn't very hard for a number of Ugandans to actually admit to say that they were Ugandans, and I'll let you know some of the reasons why. First of all, being a very small country, not so many people knew about Uganda, but I'm glad Uganda is beginning to come out in a more positive light. So going back, for the few that knew Uganda, and those are people who've been around, like who go as far as the 70s, the 80s, who were maybe a little bit older then. So if you talked about Uganda, people would come to you. If you talk about Uganda, or if you would say I'm Ugandan in any country outside the continent, or even on the continent, the first thing people would ask you also, so is that Idi Amin? That's the response. Well, at least from my experience, that's the response I've been getting when you mention that you're from Uganda. So then you have to explain and say there is more to Uganda than Idi Amin. So anyways, so for those who want to get an insight and want to get to know about Uganda, today I'm delighted to carry on with the series, our fun and interesting series about different African countries. And so today is letter U, and we're covering Uganda. If you want to know anything about Uganda, this is the series. You don't want to miss this. If you want to get an insight, or if you want to get a better understanding of what Uganda is all about, I would strongly encourage you to follow me on this live or today's episodes. We'll try to do maybe 30 minutes, and if time allows, we'll do another 30 minutes. And if you can't make it all the way, because this might take a little bit of an hour, this will be actually available on our YouTube channel, because for some of the series, at times I can't post all the series because like TikTok is a little bit tricky with some with some content. So I'm gonna make time, just like as I have with the other series, to share it on the YouTube. If you want to cover the whole, if you want to check in the whole series without any interruption, I would encourage you to do that. But as I said, if you've missed your favorite African countries, they're all on your on our YouTube channel. So just go into the profile, you'll see you'll see our links to YouTube, to the website if you want to get to know about Exhibit Africa, that as well. So all the content, all the links that you need to give you a better insight already there. And also that we have an email if you want to get in touch, you have questions, you have concerns, suggestions, whatever. Anyways, I don't want to take more time because we want to get to know Uganda. So part one. So as usual, I'm going to cover the culture, name, orientation. We're going to look at the demography. We're going to look at the history, food and economy, and a lot more. And by the time, as I said, by the time we leave this, you are gonna pretty much know you're gonna have knowledge of what you need to know about Uganda. So let's get started now. Today's fun and interesting facts are by courtesy of everyculture.com. If you want to check them out, feel free to do that. And compiled by brought to you by courtesy of Exhibit Africa Inc. Read to you by yours truly, Christine. So let's get started with the culture name of Uganda. So the culture name of Uganda is Ugandan. Let's look into the orientation. So the identification as far as Uganda goes, so Lake Choga serves as a rough boundary between Bantu speakers in the south and Nilotic and Central Sudanic language speakers in the north. Despite the division between North and South in political affairs, this linguistic boundary actually runs roughly from the northwest to the southwest, near the course of the Nile. However, many Ugandans live among people who speak different languages, especially in rural areas. Some sources describe regional variation in terms of physical characteristics, clothing, bodily adornment, and mannerisms, but others claim that those differences are disappearing. Okay, so before we continue on, I just want to let you know that some of the fun and interesting facts in today's episode might be outdated. So if you have any updated information, please feel free to share. Okay, so let's look at the location and geography of Uganda. So Bantu speakers probably entered southern Uganda by the end of the first millennium. They had developed centralized kingdoms by the 15th and 16th century. And after independence from British rule in 1962. Bantu speakers constituted roughly of 2/3 of the population. They are classified as either Eastern Lukaristrain or Western Lukaristrain Bantu. The Eastern Lukaristrain Bantu speakers include the Baganda people, whose language is Luganda, the Basoga, and many other smaller groups in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. The Western Lukaristrain Bantu speakers include the Banyoro, the Batoro, Banyankole, and several smaller populations in Uganda. Nilotic language speakers probably entered the area from the north beginning about CE 1000, thought to be the first cattle-herding people in the area. They also rallied on crop cultivation. The largest Nilotic populations in Uganda are the Iteso and the Karamojong ethnic groups, who speak Eastern Nilotic languages, and the Acholi, Langi, and Luo, who speak Western Nilotic languages. Central Sudanic languages, which arrived in Uganda from the north over a period of centuries, are spoken by the Lugbar, the Madi, and a few small groups in the northwestern part of the country. Now, we're going to look at the demographics. The population was about 23 million in mid-1999. The Eastern Lukaristrain Bantu include the Baganda, the Basoga, the Bagishu. The Baganda are the largest ethnic group that counts for about 17% of the population, or approximately 3.9 people. The second largest ethnic group, the Basoga, make up about 8% of the population, or 1.8 million people, while the Bagishu constitute roughly of 5% of the population, or just over 1 million people. The Western Lukaristrain Bantu, the Banyoro, Batoro, and Banyankole people probably constitute around 3% of the population, or 700,000 people each. Now, as I mentioned that these numbers might be outdated, so I believe the populations have they've gone up. So if you have any updated information, please feel free to share that in the comment section. All right, so we carry on with the Western Nilotic language groups, which include the Karamojong cluster, the Iteso, and the Kakwa. The Karamojong account for about 12% of the population, which is roughly 2.8. The Iteso amount to about 8%, which is 1.8, and the Kakwa constitute 1%, which is about 230,000. The Western Nilotic languages group include the Langi and the Acholi, as well as the Alo. Together, they account for roughly 15% of the population, well, about 3.4 people, with the Langi contributing 6%, the Acholi contributing 4%, and the Luo probably about 2%. Central Sudanic languages are spoken by about 6% of the population, mostly in the northwest. The Lugbar amount to 3.8%, and the Madi roughly 1.2%, which are the largest of the who are the largest of these groups, representing the southeastern corner of the belt of Central Sudanic language speakers stretching from Chad to Sudan. About 10,000 Ugandans of Sudanese descent are classified as Nubians. They are descendants of the Sudanese military recruits who came in the late 19th century as part of the colonial army. Rwandans, who constitute almost 6% of the population in the late 1950s, included Hutu and the Tutsis. The government attempted to limit Rwandese influence by restricting those who lacked Ugandan citizenship to refugee camps and expelling some to Tanzania. In the late 1980s, more than 120 Rwandese were recognized as refugees. Asians who in the 1969 census mounted to some 70,000 people, mainly of Indian and Pakistan descent, were officially considered foreigners, despite the fact that more than half were born in Uganda. After independence, and especially when the Obote government threatened to nationalize many industries in 1969, Asians exported much of their wealth and were accused of graft and tax evasion. President Idi Amin deported about 70,000 Asians in 1972, and only a few returned in the 1980s to claim their expropriated land, buildings, factories, and estates. In the 1990s, there were about 10,000 Asians in the country. Okay, so we're going to move on to the linguistic affiliation. Introduced by the British in the late 19th century, English was the language of the colonial administration. After independence, it became the official language used in government, commerce, and education. Official publications and mostly major newspapers appear in English, which often is spoken on radio and television. Most residents speak at least one language. Swahili and Arabic are widely spoken. Now, we're going to go back to the ethnic and the, I beg your pardon, we're going to go back to the history and ethnic relations. Emergence of the nation. After independence in 1962, ending a period of colonization that began in 1885, there was little indication that the country was headed to social or political upheaval. Instead, Uganda appeared to be a model of stability and progress. It had no white settler class attempting to monopolize the cash crop economy. There was no legacy of conflict. It was the African producers who grew the cotton and the coffee that brought a higher standard of living, financed education, and led to the high expectation for the future. Independence arrived without a national struggle against the British, who devised a timetable for withdrawal before local groups had organized a nationalistic movement. Then, the near absence of nationalism among the country's ethnic groups led to a series of political compromises. Now, we're going to move on to the national identity. Ethnic and religious divisions, as well as historical enmities and rivalries, contributed to the country's disintegration in the 1970s. There was a wide gulf between Nilotic speakers in the north and the Bantu speakers in the south, and an economic division between pastoralists in the drier rangelands of the west and north, and agriculturists in the better watered highland and lakeside regions. There was also a historical division between the centralized and sometimes despotic rule of ancient African kingdoms and the kinship-based politics elsewhere. The kingdoms were often at odds in regard to the control of the land. During the colonial period, the South had laïries, cash crops, a system of Christian mission education, and the seat of government, seemingly at the expense of other regions. There were also religious groups that had lost ground to rivals in the past. For example, the domination of Muslims at the end of the 19th century by Christians allied to British colonialism. All these divisions precluded the formation of a national culture. Now, we're going to move on to the ethnic relations. After independence, there were conflicting local nationalisms. The Buganda's large population, extensive territory in the favored south, and self-proclaimed superiority created a backlash among other Ugandan people. Nubians shared little sense of identification with other groups. They closely related peoples of nearby Zaire and the Sudan soon became embroidered in civil wars in the 1960s and the 1970s, drawing in ethnically related Ugandans. Today, relations are relatively harmonious. However, suspicion remains with the present, believing to favor certain groups from the West and the country over others. All right, so let's move on to the food and economy. Food in daily life. Most people except a few who live in urban centers, produce their own food. Most people eat 2 meals a day, lunch and supper. Breakfast, often a cup of tea or porridge. Meals are prepared by women and girls. Men and boys aged 12 and above do not sit in the kitchen, which is separate from the main house. Cooking usually is done in an open wood fire. Popular dishes include matoke, a staple made from bananas, millet, bread, cassava, tapioca or manioc, sweet potatoes, chicken, beef stews, freshwater fish. Other foods include white potato, yams, corn, cabbage, pumpkin, tomatoes, millet, peas, sorghum, beans, groundnuts, goat meat, milk. Oranges, papayas, lemons, and pineapples are also grown and consumed. The national drink is warag, a banana gin. Restaurants in large population centers such as Kampala, the capital, serve local foods. Now, let's look at the basic economy. Most of the food is produced domestically. Uganda exports various foodstuffs, including fish and fish products, corn, coffee, and tea. The environment provides good grazing land for cattle, sheep, and goats. Agriculture is the most important sector of the economy, employing over 80% of the workforce. Much production is organized by farmers, cooperatives. Smallholder farmers predominated in the 1960s and 70s but declined as a result of civil conflict. In the 1980s, the government provided aid to farmers, and by the middle of the decade, nearly 100 ranches had been restocked with cattle. Lakes, rivers, and swamps cover about 20% of the land surface. And fishing is an important rural industry. The basic currency is the shilling. Now let's look at the land tenure and property. At independence, the country was at a patchwork of district administrators, subdivided into counties and consolidated into provinces. As a result of a treaty with the British in 1900, Uganda retained its monarchy together with a modified version of its government and a distinctive form of quasi-freehold land tenure. Land was divided between the protectorate government and the Kabaka, or the king, chiefs, and other tribal notables. The Milo land quickly became an important element in the colonial farming economy. Uganda has a long history of diverse laws and social systems governing land tenure. Since the promulgation of the Land Reform Decree in 1975, only two systems of land tenure existed: leasehold and customary tenure. But in practice, a complex mixture of systems, including customary, leasehold, and freehold, continue to exist. The government attempted to simplify and unify the land tenure system. A major development in the process has been the inclusion of land tenure in the Constitution of 1995. However, issues such as women's rights to own land require further consideration. Now we're going to move on to the commercial activities. The major goods and services produced for sale of foodstuffs and cash crops for The major goods and services produced for sale are foodstuffs and cash crops for exportation, with coffee as the major export crop. Uganda escaped widespread famine in the late 1970s and 1980s because many people, including urban residents, resorted to a subsistence cultivation. Both commercial and subsistence farming operated in the monetary and non-monetary sectors, representing the government with problems of organization and taxation. In the late 1980s, government reports estimated that about 44% of gross domestic product organized outside the monetary economy. Most monetary activity was agriculture. Now let's check out the industries in Uganda. When the present government seized power in 1986, industrial production was negligible, consisting mostly of the processing of crops and the production of textiles, wood and paper products, cement and chemicals. Industry was a small part of the GDP in the late 1980s, operating at approximately 1/3 of the level of the early 1970s. Under Museveni, there has been some industrial rejuvenation, although this was amounted not to much more than the repair of damage done during the civil war in the industrial infrastructure. The sugar industry was rehabilitated through joint ventures, including the private sector and the government. By the 1990s, there was a refining capacity of at least 140,000 tons of sugar annually. Other rehabilitated industries included beer brewing, tobacco, cotton, and cement. About 7% of adults worked in industry by the 1990s. During the 1990s, industrial growth was at 13.2%. I'm wondering if that's still the case. Please keep us posted. All right, so let's move on to trade. In 1998, the country exported products worth $575 million. The main export commodities were coffee at 54% of the total value, gold, fish products, cotton, tea, and corn. The countries receiving most of these products were Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, France, and Italy. The main imports include chemicals, basic manufacturing goods, machinery, and transport equipment. Okay, we're moving on to division of labor. In the 1990s, the labor force was estimated to be about 8.5 million, with more than 85% working in agriculture, 4% in industry, and 10% in the service sectors. Jobs are allocated according to the ability and preference. Okay, now we're moving on to social stratification, that's classes and castes. Although there are no castes, there is relatively a high degree of social inequality. In the mid-1990s, 55% of the population lived below the poverty line. The top 10% owned about 1/3 of the available wealth, while the bottom 10% owned 3%. Wealth distribution is governed by the class position. The richest people live mostly in the capital, which is Kampala. Symbols of social stratification. Social stratification is governed primarily by the level of education and status derived primarily from employment. Among the elites, English is the language of communication, and these people dress in modern Western fashion. Others tend to wear traditional dresses. Let's check out the political life. Government. Under the Constitution of 1995, legislative power in the hands of the unicameral parliament, the National Resistance Council, was 276 members. 214 were elected directly and 62 were appointed. Executive powers were held by the president. Executive powers are held by the president, who is directly elected for a 5-year term. On coming to power in 1986, the government introduced a no-party democracy known as the movement system, with a national network extending from the capital to the rural areas. Only one political organization, formerly the National Resistance Movement, or NRM, and now known as the Movement, is recognized. It's the party of President Museveni. Among the parties that exist but are not allowed to sponsor candidates, the most important are Ugandan People's Congress, which is UPC, the Democratic Party, DP, and the Conservative Party, which is CP. I think this has changed as we speak. I think all the parties are involved in the running of the politics and the campaigns. I would suggest that you do more research on this. Now let's check out the leadership and political officials. It is alleged that one of the main criteria for advancement in the current government is whether an individual fought in President Museveni's guerrilla army, which was instrumental in bringing the regime in power in 1986. These people are said to have achieved their positions through a combination of hard work, influence peddling, and corruption. All right, so let's move on to social problems and control. After the victory of the National Resistance Army, NRA, in 1986, the NRA assumed responsibility for internal security. The police force was reorganized, and together with other internal security organs began to enforce law and order in all districts except those experiencing labor activity. There are two continuing civil wars against the Lord Resistance Army and against guerrillas based in the Sudan. In 1995, the government established a legal system based on English, common law, and customary law. There is a court. There's a court of appeal and a high court, both with judges appointed by the president. The most common crimes are theft and, in some parts of the country, banditry. Once again, I would like to let you know that some of the information I'm sharing might be outdated, so please feel free again to update us with any current information, or you can do some more research. Okay, so we're going to move on to the political activity. Uganda has an army, a navy, and an air force. The NRM has about 7,000 troops. Recruitment is voluntary. There is no fixed term for service, and both men and women can serve. In 1999, Uganda military forces supported the labor forces in the civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Interesting. All right, so we're gonna take a break because we're at 30 minutes, and then we'll be back with part 2 of Let's Get to Know Uganda, fun and interesting facts about this beautiful nation, and see you there. Thank you.